So good evening and welcome to everyone to Basic Science Leads the Way. We have a really special program planned for you this evening. We're doing something a little different than we've ever done before. We're going to be featuring a discussion between two of our campus leaders about the biggest threats to public health and also some of the greatest biological innovations that are on the horizon. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Michael Liu, Dean of the School of Public Health, and Michael Botchan, Dean of Biological Sciences. So first, Dr. Michael C. Liu is the Dean of the School of Public Health here at UC Berkeley. Prior to coming to Berkeley, Liu served as director of the Federal Maternal and Child Health Bureau under the Obama administration. For his leadership, he was awarded the prestigious U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Hubert H. Humphrey Service to America Award in 2013. Dr. Liu was a practicing obstetrician for nearly 2 decades. He's attended more than 1,000 births and has been voted one of the best doctors in America since 2005. Dean Liu received his bachelor's degree in political science and human biology from Stanford University, master's degrees in health and medical sciences and public health from UC Berkeley, his medical degree from UC San Francisco, and residency training in obstetrics and gynecology from UC Irvine. Dean Michael Botchan is a professor of biochemistry, biophysics, and structural biology, and a deputy director and member of the governance board of the Innovative Genomics Institute. He is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. The Botchan Lab at UC Berkeley studies the mechanisms and regulation of DNA replication and gene expression in eukaryotes, especially focused on how these processes couple to the cell cycle and progression from G1 to S phase in a developmental context. Dean Botchan received his bachelor's degree in biology from New York University and a doctorate in biophysics from UC Berkeley. So there will be a question and answer period towards the end of the hour to address any questions from the audience. Please feel free to submit any questions you have as we're talking in the chat box throughout this discussion. So I'll start with a question for the deans. And the first question is, our university and society are still dealing with the lingering effects of a global pandemic. For both deans, how have the federal government and UC Berkeley shifted to prevent and respond to future pandemic concerns? And maybe we'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah, okay, I can kick it off. First, let me thank Michael and Sarah for joining us in this experiment. It's a pleasure to be doing this, but we're now representing hundreds of faculty rather than our own particular research. So if I leave people out, it's just that I have too much on my plate to talk about, and only talking about what's coming to mind first. And at the federal level, I think that this is something that Michael probably knows a lot more about than I do. But I am particularly interested in ARPA-H, and that's the agency of projects, advanced projects for research, which is sort of modeled after DARPA, and it's housed within NIH, but it has as its focus many things that are supposed to be dealing with broad issues of disease and human health, not in the way that NIH usually does. And they're looking for platforms and big programs that'll be used around the world and in the United States that'll be disruptive for human health, and we're hoping to get some funding here at Berkeley from ARPA-H. The other thing that at the federal level, and I'll pass it on to Michael soon to talk about what he might think is going on at the federal level. I've been in contact with Harold Varmus for quite a while about what's happening at the community level in New York City. They have actually built a structure, a network of people from different hospitals, and it's interesting how New York has responded to this. And at Berkeley, when I get the opportunity to talk in a moment about what's happening here locally. I think Berkeley and San Francisco and the Bay Area have not really, as far as I know, responded in a way that has the whole community involved. Michael, do you have anything to add on before we jump into what's happening here at Berkeley? Do you have anything to add about the federal responses to the pandemic?
Yeah. So first of all, Mike, it's just always fun to be on the panel with you. I would say, from a public health perspective, one of the most important lessons from the pandemic is the price we paid for the chronic underinvestment in public health, both in this country and around the world. Right? So, for example, for our nation, for every dollar we spend in healthcare, we spend less than 3 cents in public health. And in the decade prior to the pandemic, we actually lost about 25% of the governmental public health workforce. And so it's kind of no wonder that during the pandemic, we had such a tough time responding to public health emergencies. And so I think the federal government's taking stock of the lessons learned. I'm glad they're putting in like $8.7 billion to create 100,000 new public health jobs over the next few years. But certainly we could be doing more. And again, I'll let you talk, Mike, about what we're doing here in Berkeley, and then I can talk about what we're doing.
Well, I think there's been a lot of response to the pandemic here, and we all know that locally at UC Berkeley, and we all know that this is not the last pandemic that we're going to be facing. And one of the things that I'm very happy about is that virology is really, which was the cause of the last pandemic, is really on the upswing. MCB has hired a virologist who studies viruses and how they evolve. Molly O'Hanley is her name. We have actually an endowed graduate fellowship that's specified to people studying animal viruses. And this is from the Kitt family, a Gordon Kitt family. But I think there are things that we responded to that are now inactive, but all the infrastructure is still here. So one of the things that people know about is that we developed here at Berkeley our own CLIA certified lab. And it was some of the first testing that was done in the Bay Area of homeless people and firemen was done here in the IGI building. So we bought all the equipment, and we learned that we can count on ourselves to molecular biologists who were trained to do biochemistry and molecular biology, quickly learned how to do testing in a CLIA certified lab. And all the robots and all the instruments and the methods that were used were done very rapidly. And this needed help from people in the School of Public Health, from the chancellor, and it's still around. It's been decommissioned, but it's ready for the next pandemic. I think an important thing that I'm quite excited about is that there's been a lot of interest in diagnostics. And just at the end of last month, Jennifer Doudna and Jamie Kate have had a patent issued with other people from MCB where they've used a new class of CRISPR enzymes to recognize RNA. And the coronaviruses, of course, are RNA viruses. And usually we're used to thinking of CRISPR enzymes as recognizing DNA and doing gene editing. But part of this patent is a brilliant enzyme, actually, that once it binds to, let's say, the next coronavirus, RNA, messenger RNA, or the viral RNA itself, and it sees the messenger RNA in a large sample that's not purified, it converts itself into an RNA cleaving enzyme that cleaves all the RNA in the extract, and then the RNA that's degraded starts some of the there's a fluor and a quencher attached to the RNA, and it gets cleaved in the middle, and the fluor now lights up. So it actually is a simple diagnostic that can be used anywhere in the field. So this is an example of how people have sort of used what they know to do things in very unexpected way with patents that are presumably going to be important. I think something that Michael can talk about is that we're actually on this upswing of viruses for the next pandemic. The School of Public Health and Integrative Biology are doing a search for a faculty member who's interested in zoonosis. And zoonosis, of course, is a disease where the pathogen leaps from one organism to another. Michael, do you want to say a little bit about that search?
Yeah. So you all probably can know that there are probably close to about 1 million viruses kind of lurking in the wild right now that can make that leap. And then we got this like perfect storm of both climate change and globalization and urbanization and so forth that are bringing animal hosts closer to humans. And so the question of that virus making that leap to human, it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when. And so unfortunately, COVID-19 is not going to be the last or even the deadliest pandemic. And this is kind of where just partnering with Mike and biology and looking for that next kind of faculty who's going to help kind of lead Berkeley's effort in terms of predicting and preventing the emergence of kind of zoonotic diseases. I think that's certainly super exciting, especially a place like Berkeley.
Michael, I wonder if you want to add, kind of going along that vein, the other search that's going on in the School of Public Health, say something about the viral phylogenomics and phylogenetic search.
Right, and that's another search that we're doing, and this really looking at the genomics of viruses, and taking the broader public health approach that combine both laboratory science as well as community-based research, bring it to the field to help us able to better understand the biology of these infectious diseases of pandemic potential.
Sarah, before we move on, I just wanted to ask you, your lab was certainly active in the COVID nimbleness that campus faculty had, but your main focus has been TB. Are you going back to TB?
Yeah, I am. So I'll just add a little context to Mike's question. I run the Biosafety Level 3 facility on campus, and these are specialized laboratories that are used for working with pathogens that are spread through the air and have the potential to kill people. And my lab focuses on TB, which is a disease that is endemic in much of the world. It's associated with poverty, and it kills almost 2 million people every year. During the pandemic, we were able to pivot really quickly to bring COVID in before we really knew anything at all about the virus, how deadly it was, how safe it was. And we could work with it in the lab because we had this very specialized facility. And we were able to partner with 15 different labs on campus, at Stanford, at UCSF, companies, to facilitate COVID-19 research really rapidly. There is still some of that ongoing on campus, but I have turned back to TB, which is a disease which still is killing, unfortunately, a lot of people in the world every year.
Hey, Sarah, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I know you're the moderator, but I know some of your work around TB. It's just absolutely breathtaking. Just how exciting it is. Can you just talk a little bit about your work on TB right now?
Oh, sure. For most people, I think in the US and in Western Europe really don't know that much about TB because it is a disease of the global South and it is a disease associated with poverty. The thing about TB is that once you get infected with TB, it's very easy to get infected with TB. It's thought that one bacterium can establish an infection in your lungs. And the interesting thing about TB is once you've been infected with TB, it's thought that you can never eliminate the infection. Your immune system can control, but not eliminate infection. And so throughout your lifetime, you have this risk of active disease and then potentially dying from the disease. And as with many bacterial infections, there's antimicrobial resistance and it's very difficult to treat. We just don't understand very much about the biology of TB. We don't understand the immune response. Unlike with COVID-19, we haven't been able to figure out how to make a vaccine really rapidly or at all that can be effective against TB. And so what my lab works on is trying to understand how do animals respond to infection with TB? What is successful when we're able to contain an infection? What makes us able to contain an infection? When it doesn't work, why doesn't it work? And how is the bacterium actually directing our immune responses in an unproductive way? And the ultimate goal is to be able to develop vaccines and new therapeutics for this disease.
Noble cause.
Thanks. Okay, so going back to my role as moderator, I'm hoping that you can both speak to some of the medical issues that both the Biological Sciences Division and the School of Public Health are most concerned with. What kinds of initiatives have been launched to address these issues? One example maybe that we could talk about is, I alluded to the fact that antimicrobial drug resistance is a looming medical crisis. So what are Berkeley scientists doing to find new antibiotic drugs or other solutions to this problem?
Yeah, Sarah, you're going to be involved again in holding the show, moving it forward. But one of the things that I'm very excited about is something that we're doing with Doug Clark and the College of Chemistry and the Harvard Medical School, and this is a group of faculty. There are 23 faculty here at Berkeley and at Harvard Medical School, and there's one person even from Davis. And it's focused around a company that's headed by Steve Isaacs called X Biotics, and which is a for-profit company. And what this group is doing, we meet as 23 PIs, Doug and myself, once a month and spend the whole day. We're meeting again on Saturday. And what we're trying to do is harness the immune system to tackle antimicrobial drug resistance. And of course, there are lots of microbes that we could focus on. There are fungal, there are parasitic, viral, and the most important one, of course, is bacterial. And that's what we're focusing on. We're trying to develop new ways that can harness the immune system to work in a very specific way where the antibiotic is linked to a biological through a linker. So you might have, there are many different kinds of antibiotics that can be linked through linkers to a receptor or something that will target something in the immune system to bring the bacteria at the local site to the immune system so that the immune system has a head start and the appropriate immune cells are getting there. So this is a very exciting enterprise, and I think that it's something that people are not aware of what the looming problems will be. And this is not really a scare tactic to talk about this, but I think the World Health Organization has estimated that in 2 decades, roughly more people will die of bacterial infections than cancer. And we're talking about, tens of millions of deaths. And this is something that is not particularly exciting to big pharma at this point. I think that's one thing, and I'd like Sarah to actually add a little bit to that. But something else that's going on right here now, of course, is we're all worried about neurodegenerative diseases, and we have one particular exciting thing is Randy Sheckman has devoted himself to a new foundation it's called Aligning Science to Access Parkinson's, ASAP, and the ASAP organization is partners with the Michael Fox organization, where they're actually going back to basics and trying to understand the causes of neurodegenerative disease and using genomics and genetics, molecular biology, biochemistry, and many of our faculty here have been working in this international conglomerate or consortium. But Sarah, let's go back, and do you have something to add about the kinds of things that the PIs are doing? Sarah heads the immunology group. Michael Marletta heads the chemistry group. Sarah?
I think that you did a nice job of talking about the activities that we're engaged in with Harvard. I guess I would say.
Oops, you froze.
All right. Well, so yeah, Mike, I totally agree with you. I think one of the most effective way of combating antimicrobial resistance, which I think it's a huge public health crisis, is by vaccinating people against preventable infections, right? And so the discovery is going to be important. The implementation of a global vaccination program, that's going to be really important as well. There are other things that we could be doing from a public health perspective, right? Certainly educating the public, that's what we do in public health, and that's important, right? If you get prescribed antibiotics, make sure you follow the direction, make sure you finish the course of antibiotics, make sure you don't take somebody else's antibiotics, make sure you don't take antibiotics to treat viral infections, because it doesn't work, right? I mean, even some of the very, very basic stuff, we gotta make sure that we're educating the public. We gotta be regulating the unnecessary prescription of antibiotics, and we gotta make sure that we're limiting unnecessary use of antibiotics in agriculture, in husbandry. I mean, there are things that we could be doing to help avert this huge silent public health crisis.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think we've lost Sarah. I don't know what we're going to do about it. Rain and wind is affecting internet connections, and hopefully Sarah can rejoin us. But why don't we just continue?
I'll throw questions at you then. May I do that?
Yeah.
All right. So I wonder. I mean, there's so many exciting things going on in biology right now. I was wondering if can you talk about something that you're most excited about?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about other people's work here, and that's really hard, but I guess that's what deans are supposed to do, Mike.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think one of the real aspirational goals of the Innovative Genomics Institute is to be able to deliver CRISPR cures not through ex vivo. In other words, not by curing sickle cell anemia, for example. Right now, it costs millions of dollars per treatment, or someone has to have their bone marrow taken out, parts of it, and irradiated so that the newly converted cells from a petri dish can be injected back in and have a treatment. someday we'll be able to take a CRISPR cure through an injection the way we do a vaccine. And there are people working here on campus and all around the world to deliver RNP particles through injection that will home into the right place. And we can cure people of sickle cell anemia for very, very wouldn't cost. It'd be like sequencing genomes. It used to cost $1 billion to sequence the human genome. Now we can do it for a few $100s. So this is, it's still aspirational, but it's something that I hope will happen in my lifetime. And certainly understanding why messenger RNA had to be modified in specific ways to make the vaccine will help understanding how we can make CRISPR and package it in materials that can be injected and hopefully someday cure many different kinds of diseases. That would be some of my friends, even here at Berkeley, say that this is a pipe dream, but I think it will happen. I predict that it will happen. When, I don't know. I think another, pardon?
Can I ask you a follow-up question,
Yeah.
Mike, on just the incredible application of CRISPR? Because I used to think that CRISPR is just to treat like single gene diseases, but it turns out that its application could be a lot wider.
Yes.
From like heart disease to cancer and so forth. And this has to do with the idea of the epigenetic modifications that CRISPR could also do. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that there are right now none of it is low-hanging fruit, but macular degeneration, for example, can be treated. You can take a needle and help prevent macular degeneration. Surgeons are developing tools for going into the brain and breaking the blood-brain barrier with CRISPR methods. The liver is one tissue organ that can be accessed now, and people are looking at curing liver diseases without transplantation. But again, this will explode when we learn how to hone particular particles to particular places in a person. And I think someday it'll be as easy as a vaccination. It'll happen. Sarah, you're back.
I'm back.
Good to see you.
It's good to be back. Sorry everyone for that interruption.
Yeah. We were just
Sarah,
discussing.
I took your baton and I asked Mike what he's most excited about with all the innovation, all the discoveries that are going on in biology right now. So I'll pass the baton back to you.
Okay, well, actually,
I had one more thing, moving it away from CRISPR, because that's, everyone is talking about it and it's always in the newspaper. I think something that is really exciting to all of us is the sort of, it's been coined in vivo biochemistry. Being able to watch molecules move around in an organism and in a cell, complexes, is going to get more and more exciting. And a lot of that is happening here at Berkeley. So if we're talking about human health, for example, we have drugs that pharmaceutical or small compounds that can actually destroy an enzyme in a test tube. But when that drug gets into a person through a pill or through injection, how it actually finds its target within the cell, and whether the target itself is the only target, we can actually look at this now, or at least dream that eventually we'll be able to follow it, certainly within a cell, if not in a human being. And most of the time, drugs fail because we don't understand the complexities in the cell. that drug, even if it has a very, very minor off target, may affect many different things. And you can follow this with imaging methods now that are absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. I think that's true. And one of the things that's so exciting about being at Berkeley is being able to witness these new technologies emerge in real time, you know, before they're ready for application in the clinic. But I think that leads to the next question, which is for Dean Liu, which is, I'm going to start calling you Dean Liu and Dean Botchan because it's too confusing to have two
Mike and Michael.
titles here.
Mike and Michael.
So the next question for Dean Liu is, you know, all of these new technologies and everything that's being developed is really exciting. But from, you know, one thing that people think about from a public health perspective is how, you know, these treatments, when they first emerge, they're very expensive. So how can these cutting edge treatments be made that are available to the wealthy first become accessible to everyone?
Yeah, great question. Let me just kind of add to the excitement first. I think we're really at the cusp of another huge industrial revolution that's going to completely transform our lives, right? And it's kind of what I call the bio revolution. It's analogous to, I'm thinking back to the 1980s when I was in college, and here I was typing my term paper on the typewriter and going to the library to like search up a piece of information. Little did I know at that time that we were like in the midst of a whole digital revolution that was going to completely change our lives in the next decade, right? Because the internet was already born in 1983, and that was quickly followed by personal computing and Google and iPhone and iTunes, and it changed the way we work, we learn, we communicate with each other. So that's what's kind of really exciting about this era right now. In fact, there's a McKinsey report that predicts that in the next decade, this bio revolution is going to replace about 60% of synthetic materials that are being used today, reduce global burden of diseases by about 40%, add trillions of dollars into the economy, and perhaps even save the planet, which Mike can probably talk a little bit about some of the work that's going on at the IGI with CRISPR in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases. Of course, the big question is, why am I in this conversation, right? Like, well, what's public health involvement? Well, there are some really important questions that we have to ask, right? So first of all, are the technologies safe, right? What if the technologies fall into the hands of bad actors, right? Do they work? Are they efficacious, or are we just selling snake oil, right? How do we make sure that these technologies are used in a way to improve health equity and not just widen health disparities, right? That I think Mike and I share this kind of vision that we want to make sure that whatever we invent here in Berkeley can go out to not just serve the wealthy few, but really to improve the public's health, right? And so again, I think the big question is, how do we make sure that all the discoveries that we're making here at Berkeley over the next decade, how do we make sure that they are used in such a way that it's safe, it's efficacious, it's efficient, effective, and that it's equitably distributed, right? And so I think these are all important questions that we should be leading the society, not only in terms of technological innovations, but a lot of these ethical questions that these technologies raise.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that we're all on the same page there, and just again, what pops to mind, and I'm sure that our audience is thinking about, is the use of AI, and how AI in the wrong hands can actually lead to lots of damage. In fact, I was reading a study where I first read about it in The Economist, where people were who were experts in predicting the future and what the probabilities were that we would have an event that would actually destroy civilization, like the meteorite that changed the course of evolution on the planet 69 million years ago. And the top worry from both specialists and generalists who in this area was how AI in the hands of someone who really was crazy could develop a microorganism, a virus that would wipe out the earth. So it is really something that that we have to be optimistic about the future and focus on how AI can develop new drugs and do wonderful things to help us actually work as a society. And we do have this new college here at Berkeley, data science, devoted to data science, where I think that's going to be one of the things that, that it's not only data and computing science, but sociology as well.
I think despite all of us having a lot of positivity and optimism about the future, everyone also at the same time, we're confronting the idea of a lot of different existential threats. Mm-hmm. And so, Michael, I'd like to follow up with you on something that you mentioned, which is the idea that climate change is something that the divisions of biological science may be addressing at the IGI through CRISPR. And I'm wondering if one of you could follow up just briefly on that to tell the audience a little bit about that.
I think there are lots of different approaches to this, but we all know about the microbiome and how our gut is important in stress response and even cancer. But plants have their own microbiomes. We call it the mycorrhiza. And the roots of some plants have bacteria that grow on these plant roots that actually will take the CO2 and actually convert it into through biochemical pathways into minerals. So plants can be planted and fix the CO2 into minerals into the ground, removing it from the air. And one of the things, projects that's really gearing up at the IGI is to actually improve that process in the plant mycorrhiza. There are other people working on actually both faculty who aren't part of the IGI and in the IGI, and how to engineer cows to not have as much have as much methane production. So these are all, these are all going on in the lab now. To get into the details for how this is actually done is quite fascinating, and people can certainly write and find out about how we can actually have plants do a good job in removing CO2 from the environment.
It's always fascinating to hear the breadth of the kinds of discoveries that are being made on campus. So health and basic discovery was one of the few multidisciplinary research areas that was highlighted in the concluding Light the Way campaign for campus. I'm curious, what new initiatives or goals came from that campaign, and how do you see your two schools collaborating on initiatives in the future?
Well, I think the most important collaboration we have is our valuable resources, including space. So the School of Public Health and Biological Division, our Biosciences Division, share buildings in common. The new building, the Li Ka-shing Center, There are faculty from the School of Public Health there. There are people in the School of Public Health in Koshland Hall, and doing joint searches and making sure that with turnover of faculty, we work together to recruit the best faculty who, and you know, the campaign has allowed us to get to know each other and to help each other with faculty retentions and recruitment. And that's a very pointed and important issue. We need more money for renovations and things like that. Michael, do you want to follow?
Yeah, so I think working with you over the last few years, just I think really made clear to me just how symbiotic our relationship is, right? So I have to tell you, there's a whole graveyard of public health interventions that don't work because we actually never really understood the mechanisms of the diseases that we were trying to prevent. And similarly, having biologists gaining a broader public health perspective could potentially help them scale their impact in the world. I think an example I often use is it was absolutely breathtaking for the world to come up with mRNA vaccines in less than a year. What doesn't get played as much as getting 8 billion doses of vaccine into like 5 billion arms around the world. That's equally breathtaking, right? And that speaks to just the incredible need for biology and public health to be working together to solve some of the big existential threats that we're facing.
Absolutely, yeah.
I want to.
Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
One moment. Yeah, I want to open it up to the audience questions in just a few minutes, but I do want to ask one last question related to what you just said, Michael, and that is about vaccines, because it seems like the importance of vaccines has never become more apparent after the COVID-19 pandemic, and yet vaccines are more controversial than ever. So how do you think about the concerns that there are these tools we have that can be so effective in public health, but they are becoming politicized?
Yeah, great question. Hard to answer. And certainly there have been a lot of people who talked about the need to depoliticize public health. I have to say, public health has always been political, right? Because at the end of the day, what public health is kind of what we do collectively as a society to assure the condition where everyone can be healthy. So that means kind of fighting for clean air and water. That means fighting for safe working conditions and safe housing, affordable housing, fighting for reproductive justice, fighting for access to healthcare. So public health has always been political. I think to answer your question, number one, public health has to be political, but science should not be politicized. And what I like to see is that public health, whatever we do in public health programs, public health policies are informed by the best science and best evidence, and not by politics and ideologies. Right. Number two, I think public health professionals need to become better communicators of science. Right now, we're fighting a losing battle against misinformation and disinformation, and we got to do a lot better in terms of educating the public about the science. And then my dream is that more public health leaders get involved in the political processes, that they become political leaders, right? Given when you think about all the existential threats to the world right now, from climate change to the next pandemic threat, from chronic diseases to social inequality, these are all problems that require public health to be front and center in driving solutions. and when we have a much better world if more political leaders are actually grounded in public health.
Yeah.
Great.
It's sad that scientists and science have always been there's been the Frankenstein idea that we're mad scientists that create harm, and on the other hand, there was always a very large appreciation for the brilliance and excitement of using a rational method, and the pendulum has swung, I think, away from us, and I think that all we can do as teachers is teach freshmen who aren't interested in science, and of course join national committees and work there as professionals. But it's a hard road.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll move to the follow-up questions, and audience members, please continue to post questions in the chat, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. So a question for both deans. What do you envision as being the key research directions or discoveries for the next decade in each of your fields?
Well, I thought I had mentioned a couple. I'll just repeat them to answer that question directly. One is being able to use light. I didn't put it that way, but to be able to actually do biochemical experiments with inside living cells. I think that there was a Nobel Prize to one of our faculty here for breaking the diffraction limit, and we can actually label with fluorescent probes proteins and watch them work within cells. And this is going to get more and more sophisticated to actually see how organelles form, how enzymes work in their natural environment, which is very crowded and very different from a test tube. I think that's one major direction. And the other major direction has to be, and I think Michael has said this already, that there has to be ways to more directly and quickly develop basic discovery so that it serves the public good in ways that are less expensive. That's going to require research, because we do have now methods to cure lots of diseases, but they're just too darn expensive.
Yeah, I'll just add that's a really hard question for a public health dean to answer, just because we're here to solve big problems, and there's so many big problems that we have to solve today. Like I said, climate change, the next pandemic threat, chronic diseases, social inequality. It's hard for me to say which one is more important than others. So I'll respond the way Mike responded. I think it's figuring out how do we collaborate together? How do we help harness the brain power across the various disciplines to find solutions to some of these big public health challenges? How do we accelerate the discovery process, but also the translation to spread and scale social impact around the world?
Great, thank you. We have maybe a related question, particularly applicable to a university that has such a strong teaching mission as UC Berkeley does, and that is, what educational innovations do you see coming in the future in your fields?
Well, there are lots of innovations. The problem that we have at Berkeley, which is something that I think we're solving in different ways, is how to do things at scale, and having many smaller communities that educate groups of people where we're not doing it to big classrooms is an important innovation. I think we have lots of programs that I can be proud of in our school that we've developed that are groups of 25, 50 students who come in either as, we have one program called the Biology Scholars Program, which is for a lot of people who are have great potential but need more mentoring. Can be one group, and another group where we started a program called SEED, which is an honors program for undergraduates who did have the advantage to having a great high school education where they had, calculus and beyond in high school. And there's another group of 35, 40 students who actually work together and help each other in these small groups. And we have to amplify this in many ways. And I think that is a form of innovation that I'm proud of, that we've developed. Michael, do you have another response to this question about innovation?
Yeah, a couple of things, but first of all, just kind of giving a plug to like so many things that you guys are doing in biology, and the Biology Scholars Program, the SEED program, and so forth. There are a couple of things that we're doing. Number one is the what I call the change maker curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the idea is kind of making sure that we're equipping our students not only with a world-class education on the core public health sciences, but the knowledge, tools, and skills that they need to go out and actually change the world, right? And what are those? Leadership, management, innovation, collaboration, teamwork, strategic thinking, systems thinking, policy, advocacy. So we're really expanding our curriculum right now to make sure that by the time our students graduate, they're able to go out there and bring about the change that we need to see, and whether that's organizational change, whether that's systems change in both in healthcare and public health, whether that's societal, community, or global change. The other thing that we're really doing is we're leveraging our online Master of Public Health program. It's kind of rated #1 online MPH program in the country. We're trying to spread and scale the reach of our education, and so we're using that online platform right now to retool and upskill the public health workforce here in California around both public health informatics, as well as data intelligence. How do you better use data to make better decisions in public health? And this is in collaboration with both the federal government as well as state government. We've also just got a $10 million gift from one of our alums working in rural health to provide full ride scholarships to health professionals working in rural communities interested in getting their Master in Public Health. And the idea is, can we train 100 rural healthcare leaders who's going to help improve, innovate, and transform rural healthcare in America? I am currently working on raising the next $10 million for global health fellowships. Just recognizing that one thing that we know from the pandemic is that leadership matters, and there's a critical, urgent need for a strong public health leadership, both in this country as well as around the world.
Michael, I just had an idea. It just popped in my head. Maybe you and I next year should offer a freshman one of these freshman courses on vaccines, because so many, talking about leadership and this sort of an epistemological issue of how people know what they know, and so much of it is you you get information from the appropriate leader. And a lot of people really are ignorant about vaccines. And if you ask a vaccine denier, one of our someone in the audience had some comment about a negative comment about people who don't want to take vaccines. I think a lot of it comes from ignorance. They just don't know what a vaccine is about. They think that we might be injecting them with robots. And I think a freshman course on sort of the history of vaccines and why people object to it for all sorts of reasons would be an interesting thing for us to do together.
Mike,
you may not have the time.
I think that would be great.
Hello, so this will be fun to do. Also, want to acknowledge there's a comment that we should also do a community seminar on vaccines. And I think that's going to be really important to do.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add, is that if you do this, we need to make something also available to the community, because I think that's where we could make a really big impact in education. The last couple of questions are also about vaccines, and they really relate to actually TB and vaccines for diseases like TB. Maybe I'll just take a quick stab at the questions, and then, if either of you want to add anything, you can. The first question is, the fast track COVID response was very successful. Diagnostic tools to vaccines to distributed vaccines. Are there any lessons that can be applied to accelerating our ability to address other diseases such as TB or malaria? I think what I would say about that, number one, is that the first thing that comes to mind is we were very lucky when it came to COVID-19 that it actually wasn't that hard to make a vaccine. And it was this really interesting thing that happened worldwide, where essentially every platform for making a vaccine that exists was tried, and including new platforms like mRNA vaccines. And, most of them work to some degree or another. mRNA vaccines happen to work really well. But the truth is it's not that hard to make a vaccine for COVID-19. And so for diseases like malaria or TB, a lot of these strategies have been tried, and they don't seem to work. The immune response that you need to elicit, we don't even know what it is. We don't know how to elicit it. And just doing something like taking, one surface protein like we did with COVID-19 and immunizing with that is not going to generate a protective response. But the other question is, will we see a TB vaccine in our lifetime? And I actually believe the answer is yes. Just a couple of years ago, there was a trial of a new TB vaccine, similar to some of the COVID-19 vaccines that were tried. And there was the first kind of positive signal of efficacy that has been seen for a TB vaccine. And that was 50% protection against active disease over 3 years. So that's just a baby step, because we need to protect people for decades and a lifetime. But I'm really excited about that, because right now people are starting to analyze the samples that came from the vaccinated individuals from that study. And maybe we can start to learn, okay, so this vaccine worked. We don't know why. Can we look at the immune response, and can we start to rationally engineer a better vaccine that might work? So that's my answer to those questions on vaccines. And Dean Liu or Dean Botchan, is there anything you'd like to add, or any closing remarks you'd like to make?
No, I think this was an exciting conversation. We could continue it for another hour, but if I thought I heard Michael say that we could do a freshman seminar next year. He hasn't committed.
I did.
This is recorded, so you can hold him to it. Okay, so once again, thank you, Dean Liu and Dean Botchan. I agree, this was a really fascinating discussion, and you've provided yet another example of the critical role that Berkeley's stellar faculty and pioneering research play in helping chart the future. I want to also say thank you to our audience for taking the time to join us and participate this evening. We really couldn't do our work without your attention and support. This is our final event of the year, so Happy New Year, and we'll be seeing you all in the spring. Please reach out if you want to learn more about anything we covered. We'll be sharing additional resources with you by email about today's topics and today's speakers. And in a couple of weeks, a video of today's session will be available at the Basic Science Lights the Way website. You can always return to the website to watch episodes you miss. So until next time, stay curious, fiat lux, and go Bears.
Go Bears.
Go Bears.